talk a little bit about the power of data. Before we begin, just want to thank NVPC as well for this opportunity to be part of this series of talks. Hopefully, you'll find something useful here and be able to use it within your organizations. And for us, we always like to say that we're a friendly bunch of people. If you've got any issues or if you'd like to find out a little bit more, yeah, we will be more than happy for you guys to come and speak with us. Okay, so just to get show and road. So just stealing a little bit from the last talk. Adam talked about the smart nation, why Singapore is moving towards becoming a smart nation in his talk about becoming digitalization, digital transformation. So just want to bring that narrative back here again, right? So I think that we have got many reasons why Singapore wants to digitalize. Partly, we are worried about our SMEs not being able to cope with foreign pressure, where everyone else is transforming. We also need to do our part to transform to stay competitive. I guess for us, from the health and social side of the house, we also recognize that we need to transform partly because of the aging population, our aging clients, and partly it's also because we ourselves are aging. So we are hoping that through digital transformation, we would be able to perhaps manage, right, with that new demands of care, hopefully be able to manage with lesser resources, and hopefully be able to manage, say, caregiving burnout with application of digital transformation. Just to steal the part of it here, right? Digital revolution is upon us, and Singapore must adapt to use technology to harvest the benefits of digitalization. So that's where it brings us to our topic of today. One of the benefits of digitalization is data. As we become more and more digitalized in the way that we run things, every single thing that we do generates data. Right, the phones that we use, the computers that we use, the way that we engage our clients. If more and more of these things are enabled by technology, then we would have on hand data that we can use. So how do we want to best use this? The amount of data that we generate in a day, for the lack of a word, is simply shocking. This data over here is a little bit dated. It's from 2019, right? So in a single day, we make about 5 billion Google searches, right? In a single day, we generate about 28 petabytes of data from wearable technology. Petabytes, by the way, has 15 zeros. It's a number that I can't even imagine. In a single day, we send more than 294 billion emails. By the estimate, by 2021, we're looking at about 320 billion. I think so by 2022 today, we're perhaps mastering much more than this in a single day. So yeah, well, all these are data talking about communication platforms, social media. But since you're here today, I think you probably also recognize that your organizations are also generating lots of data. So I hope that you're also wondering, so if we're generating these data, how do we then make use of it? How do we make sense of it? How do we use it in order to deliver value to our clients? So with that, before we jump into the webinar proper, just want to find out more about everyone here today. How are you doing? And also, maybe more towards the topic of the day, right? So do you use data in your day-to-day work right now? How do you use it to perhaps generate value for your clients? If so, if you're using data, how do you use it? Don't mind, you can scan this QR code and let me know. We'll look at the data on screen in a while. Let me paste the link in the chat as well. Wait, hold on. Let me fetch the link. Yeah, so So do let me know, how are you doing in terms of data? Are you using it? How do you use it to generate value for your clients? So we have yes, insightful to understand clients' needs and better manage expectations. Yes, in finance. Sharing progress data as a start point for discussion. Client responses to our better services to them. To better serve needs of beneficiaries. Not really. We use data for KPIs and accounts. What we do instead of informing what we can do better with our clients. Yes, for reporting purposes. Good. I use data for myself. Great. So I do see that all of us are already using data, right? In some way or form, we're collecting things, but are we using it for the right purposes? So I like some of you have pointed out that we are collecting data for reporting purposes, but we're currently not quite using this to perhaps creating better value for our clients. Sharing the progress of data as a starting point for discussion, so that's great. Right, so I guess this trend of using data to enhance our operations, to deliver better value for our clients is something that NCSS picked up as well. So in the Industrial Digital Plan for Social Services by 2024, they are hoping that at least 30% of us will be using data to enhance our work. By the looks of the response just now, I think we are doing well. I think that we will definitely hit this 30%. But really, we can do better, right? We can rather than just using data for reporting sake. I think there's a lot more that we can use data to do. So hopefully in today's talk, we'll share some of that examples of what other people are doing overseas as well. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Netscape. If you are familiar with Netscape, then that tells your age a little bit. So I used to use Netscape web browser, but that's back in 1993, I think, and before. So Netscape used to be the web browser to go to before Internet Explorer, before Chrome came about, before Firefox. In fact, Netscape then dissolved and become Firefox, the one that you're using today. So this is James McDale's what he said, right, to his organization back then. If we have data, let's look at data. If all we have are opinions, then let's go with mine. So what he's trying to say here also reflects a little bit about why we want to use data rather than just go with our opinions. Everybody has an opinion. If you just base on opinion, then there'll be no end to that. But can we base some of our decisions that we make within our organizations on data rather than opinions? And maybe that will really help us move forward in the way we do things. Second thing of why I want to share this quote is also actually to start becoming a data-driven organization. The challenge is not so much about, say, procuring data tools or training staff to be equipped with, say, I don't know, R or Power BI or different tools, right? The challenge is really how do you build a culture, a data-driven culture that uses data day in and day out for the decisions that you do in order to run the work that you do. So through this talk, we will be sharing about different types of data analysis, different case studies of how that has been used in other countries. We also be talking a little bit about how do we then shift and nudge our organization towards being more data-driven. So in terms of analytics, then there are a few here, 4 that we want to talk about. They vary in complexity and the value that they bring. So first on the block would be Descriptive Analytics, right? So Descriptive Analytics is looking at data in order to tell us what has happened. I think this is something that most organizations are already using and doing. So in terms of reporting of KPIs, in terms of reporting of current status and things like that, right? So that tells us what has happened before through data. So if we go one step up, then we'll be looking at diagnostic analytics. So trying to find out why has it happened. So so if your superior comes to you and say that, hey, our reviews are our feedbacks are not doing so well, can you find out why? So from data, we can also do diagnostic analytics, but we need the right data to do this, right? So then that's the next level up, slightly more complicated. We'll go into examples in a while, but yeah, so the second type would be diagnostics. And with increasing complexity, then if once we do diagnostic analytics, we actually also start to understand, what are some of the factors that affect an outcome that we want to see. If we are able to identify some of these factors that drives our outcomes, and if we're able to construct a mathematical model or a predictive model around these factors, then perhaps we are able to then predict what might happen next if I do this, what might happen, what's the likelihood of different things happening in the future. So that's predictive analytics. And once I understand these factors and the relationships and are able to construct a model out of it, then maybe this model can also tell me what to do. How can I make things happen if I want to improve an outcome? What are some of the levers that I can influence in order to see that outcome that I want to see? So then that would be a notch higher in prescriptive analytics. So each of these analytics gives us different benefits, right? So descriptive tells us of what happened in the past. With diagnostics, it tells us in the past, so this has happened and why has it happened. So that is it gives us that hindsight as to what has happened. Hindsight is great, but things has already happened. So if we're able to understand which of these factors drives the outcomes that I see, then maybe that gives us some insights, right? As to if I want to improve, if I want to transform, what are some of the issues that I should be looking at and fixing in order to do better. So with diagnostic analytics, and as we identify the factors towards maybe creating some models, then that gives us the insights and data into our business as well, into our service as well, to see what can we do better. And with predictive and prescriptive, then that gives us the foresight, right? So what might happen next, and how do I do things better? So we'll go through each of these approaches and talk a little bit more about them. So descriptive analytics, basically analytics tell us what has happened. I think this is, like what I mentioned, something that most of us are familiar, comfortable with. So trying to identify patterns in data using things like bar charts, line charts, tables, and etc. So an example here would be, say, if you're interested in looking at child protection. So this is the data that's reported by MSF. So different types of abuses that has happened over the years since 2011 to 2020. So we do see look at that. There seems to be a pattern over here in terms of increasing trend, right, of physical abuse over the years. So this is what descriptive analytics can tell us, what has happened, and we can look at a pattern and maybe infer something about that, right? So that we can infer that, hey, there's an increase over here. This is something that we want to look at. So with that happening, then maybe with the descriptive analytics, the next level that I want to go to is perhaps with diagnostic analytics to understand why has it happened. So we can do this using several approaches, such as a data drill down. So if I do have a large data set, then I can then go in to do a more granular analysis over here, try to further stratify the data to mine it to understand why, right? So has it got to do with the age of the victim? Has it got to do with perhaps geographical locations or the relationships over here? Maybe I can do some data discovery. I can merge multiple data sets together. So say, for example, I have the data on child protection investigation data, and then I have from the Narcotics Bureau some data on, say, drugs and narcotics use. Then maybe with that, as a common identifier, I can put these data sets together and can analyze them. Is there a relationship between drug use and child abuse, for example? Just to again understand why this has happened. if there's any relationship over here. But I can also apply correlation, all right? So trying to understand if there's a correlation between, say, unemployment and abuse, or narcotics and abuse. So in that example below, does child maltreatment has got to do with PPIV at home, so violence with spouse and such. Is there a correlation? So with this correlation, we can see that there is a relationship of with R of 0.85, right? And you can clearly see there's a linear relationship over here. But just to caveat here, the data that we showed over here, the increase in number of abuse cases has got nothing to do with this data over here. This is a different study. That increase, MSF has said that it has because of introduction of more rigorous screening tools, of public education, and with all that comes with increase in reporting of cases. So that increase over there was due to more cases being reported because of the work that we've been doing. Okay, but yes, so if I want to find out more about why something has happened, I can apply Diagnostic Analytics to do that. So with that, if I'm doing descriptive and diagnostic analytics already right now, right? So does that make us a data-driven organization? Does it mean that we are already there? Not quite, right? So to become a data-driven organization, it has got to do with the maturity in the way that we use data. It has got to do with how effectively we use data, right? It has got to do with whether are we using it consistently throughout our entire organization to drive key decisions, to be a fundamental part of business strategy, right? The way that we deliver value is a key part of delivering value is through data. And do we have that organization that we base our decisions on data, and is it ingrained in our day-to-day processes? In order to get valuable insights, in order to have continual growth, or in our case, maybe in social services, would be to expand our reach. Or to improve program outcomes. I think that's something that all of us are interested at doing. To optimize our operations, to best use our volunteers and our resources. To predict future trends so that I can then master resources together to anticipate, that are going to happen, and to have actionable insights that we can use in the future. Someone asked if the slides will be shared at the end. The video will be recorded, and we will put this video up on a website. I'll talk more about this at the end of the talk. So if you can stay with me till then, that would be great. Thanks for your question. Okay, so I can just give you an example over here in terms of being data-driven. So can social workers be data-driven? And how does that look like? So Newcastle City Council in UK, they have tried doing something like that, to use data to change the way social workers work on the ground to deliver long-term social care to vulnerable children and families. So what they did was that they they embed a data analyst in a team of social workers to work alongside them. And the role of this, the data analyst, is to analyze the cases that the social workers are seeing, to identify trends between the case reports that they have. With the data analyst on board, the data analyst, the social worker have got like a perspective of what the cases they're working on, but they are really working on several, maybe 1, 2 cases, 3 cases, or how many have you? But with the data analyst on board, the data analysts have the bird's eye view to look at all the cases that the entire team is working on. And they can also pull data from other teams, from other institutions as well. And with that, they are able to then conduct some analysis over here, for example, case study analysis, to identify patterns. So what they do here is not just quantitative analysis, they also go into the qualitative side of things. So for example, in the case of Newcastle, they identified that for the cases that these social workers are seeing, 20% of the children have parents with personality disorders, 60 to 70% of parents experience abuse as a child as well. So with these factors being identified, then they are also able to calculate, out of all these children, which of them have a higher chance of becoming an EET, right? Not in education, employment, or training. So with this predictive scoring, with a more understanding of the cases that they are seeing, then the social workers on the ground are able to tailor their approach to provide better care for these children, directing them to the right resources, for example. So going back to the topic on how to become data-driven as a data-driven organization. So I think one thing that we really need to look at is stop treating data as byproducts. Today, in today's date, I think we employ, say, technology, and then by the empowerment of technology, some data is being generated, and it's just sitting over there. We're not doing anything with it. So that there's pool and wells of information that's just sitting around, not doing anything. So it's a kind of a byproduct of our current process. So rather than seeing data as a byproduct, can we start to shift our views towards seeing data as a product, maybe, right? Treating data at very least as an asset that brings value to our stakeholders and our clients, and have data analysis as part of our day-to-day workflow in terms of planning, to design better programs, as part of operations to better distribute our resources, as part of service delivery to actively use data to improve client experience. And if I start to see data as an asset, then perhaps then I should be then investing more time and more resources into and tools and infrastructure in order to harness the power of data. Right? So data analysts perhaps would then have a seat on the table and disperse across the organization to enhance the work that we do on the ground. So in order so that we will be able to have data-driven decision making as part of a culture. So what do I mean by that, right? So to look at data from a perspective of how we can use it to generate value from a business understanding, where in our case, perhaps it's about not so much of a business, but understanding our clients, understanding how we deliver services, and with that understanding, be able to analyze or model data in order to come up with hypotheses on some of the data that we see. And with that insight, then goes into deployments in how we do things on the ground, such as how the social workers work on the ground with the previous example. So this data-driven decision making is really a cycle that we can go through again and again in order to improve the way that we work. With data needs to be interpreted in context. So what do I mean by that? So do we go out now and perhaps hire data analysts from all over the place and plug them into our teams, and then hopefully they will be able to help us enhance our work? Well, maybe that might help us in some ways, but they may not understand the needs of our industry as much. So while it's good to have that skill, maybe it's also a suggestion here would be to train your current social workers with data skills so that they will be able to do the analysis themselves, because they understand the context that you're working in, what they really need to look at. Yeah. The other point here I want to talk about is that it's not good to have just one or two experts in our organization sitting up on the ivory tower helping to steer and make decisions. That you have only limited effect, right? It's better to have everyone in organizations who have some understanding of data, so that then data can then be harnessed to power everything rather than limited to key decisions that organization make. The other point is also to have everyone trained to understand data and how to collect data and what quality data is important, because ultimately, if we have producing a large data set through our systems, we also need to question whether if that data it's clean? Can the data be used to understand how the data was collected? Can it be trusted? So if we have our ground workers, our social workers, our admin staff to understand a little bit of data, then they will be able also to understand how to collect data that really works to power decisions later on. Yeah. And ideally, all of us would then understand data and understand how we quantify our outcomes. So that's the next thing that I want to talk about, right? So if we want to move towards being a data-driven organization, one perspective that we might want to have is to be able to see the work that we do in our organization now as different streams of processes that finally arrive at some form of an outcome. Right, so if we're able to look at our processes from a standpoint on, these are some of our inputs, this is our current process, this is some of the outputs, and this is the outcome that we want to achieve, then we are able to then also break this down into different data sets that we might be looking at. So for example, inputs could be things such as client-related data, resources, manpower, right? So process data could look something like wait time, client progress data, and things like that. Output could be your throughput of your entire service or your throughput of your center in a day, something like that, or client experience or intervention measures, right? So do we actually help to do well? But ultimately, what we really want to get at is outcomes, right? Outcomes that our clients want to have. So if you're in, say, rehab, so then that perhaps would mean the outcome here would be functional recovery, perhaps some kind of a real-world impact, being able to go back to work. Quality of life is also an outcome measure that we can look at. Or a reduction of readmissions, reduction of repeated cases. Focusing on outcomes helps us to achieve many things, but one thing I would say to think about would be focusing on outcomes really helps us to save resources, right? So if all of us are clear about what outcomes that we want to get at, we don't need to fire so many arrows, right? We just need to fire one and hit that arrow consistently. How do we do that? So we need to then assess our effectiveness. How effective is our program right now? Can I improve my program in order to hit the outcome measure that I want to have? And focusing on outcomes also helps our organization to gain alignment, right? So our services, our programs are often not delivered by one person, right? So there's actually multiple people that have to be aligned, from processing our referrals to doing the home visits to perhaps running therapy sessions to so and so. So all of us ideally needs to be aligned on that outcome in order to deliver it well. So it's important for us to then define what are some of these outcomes and to define what social impact is. I wouldn't be able to go too deep into the topic on quantifying social impact here, because I think all of us are from perhaps different services, and each services would have your own way of looking at what impact is. So a bit hard for us to talk about that here. But some things to consider would be, one, to shift away from self-reported matrices to something more robust, such as observable or tangible outcomes. So for example, if you're looking at helping the poor with poverty, then perhaps it's looking at whether if you can help them to get and maintain an income, maybe to start a saving plan, and do they stick with it, right? To take note of how we generate data as well. Many of us, I've noticed over the years working with certain social agencies, we tend to perform convenience sampling, meaning that, I have the opportunity to collect data here with this group of people, so okay, I'll do it. Or I may pick and choose certain people to conduct some of my surveys, right? So with this, then our data will not be accurate. So the outcome measure here may paint a rosy picture, but it may not be true. So some things that we're really careful of. And if you are crafting questionnaires, then it's also to be careful the way we structure it to avoid confirmation bias, to steer the outcomes in a certain direction. And I also noticed that many of us collect data for reporting sake, but we don't quite use the data to analyze it and to think about how can we serve our clients better. So if you're currently collecting data already, then maybe it's about mastering more people that will be able to help you, or getting the skills that you'll be able to use that data to do something about it. So once again, why focus on outcomes and social impact? So that that's exactly what we do and why we're here, right? So that we know that we're doing the right things, so that we are able to organize ourselves to the outcomes that we want to see. And that's how we can innovate the way that we do things as well, organizing ourselves around outcomes and not just purely producing more and more outputs. So for example, it's not about how many clients we see, it's about whether we can help the client perform better or live a better life. And ultimately, by defining our outcomes and defining our social impact and able to quantify that helps us to justify our existence as well to our funders and perhaps to our own conscience, to make sure that we are actually benefiting our community positively. Right. So with outcomes outcomes identified and we're able to quantify and measure that, then that helps us to align priorities as well. So ideally, in a data-driven organization, every staff should understand how they contribute to that outcome matrix. So with that, then that aligns priorities and encourage different staff groups to collaborate together. That will only happen if this matrix is part of the staff's performance. And this will then allow us to have really team-based care or team-based service delivery. So an example, once again over here, Suffolk Country Council in the UK. So what they have done to come up with this common metric, right, is to create a shared outcomes framework in order to have a data-driven health and social care. So I think this piece of case study might be interesting for us, because I think this is the direction in which we are moving towards, having senior activity centers now convert to active aging centers, AACs, right? We are now looking at also health matrices as well, right? So what they did was to create a shared outcome to shift towards preventive work rather than having very cost reactive services. They did this in order to improve effectiveness and look at performance management, to support integration of frontline teams within the health and social care teams, and promote organization culture towards using data. So how did they do this? Right. So by integrating the data sets that they have from health and social care, they created what they call Connect Measure, a set of shared outcomes for health and social care teams, which consists of about 35 measures relating to important outcomes such as number of emergency admissions, ambulance callouts, length of stay in hospital, delay transfer of care. Sorry, I think I messed up the word over there. Neighborhood networks, how well are neighborhoods integrated. More on the social side, re-enablement, where people are supported with daily living activities to develop confidence to live independently at home. And also some other matrices such as workforce development. Right, so how was this measure used? Connect Measure was then shared across health and social care teams on a monthly basis, so that they are able to see, how are they performing, and how are they performing with regards to other teams as well. So it's a little bit of a competition over here, just to know that how do we compare with everyone else. That is, I believe, a healthy kind of a comparison, so that they then know how well they're doing, and perhaps to also find out from other teams how do they do things and can we do better. Weekly meetings. In weekly meetings, this is the data is also reviewed in looking at the wait lists in order for the team to decide, right, who of this integrated team will then carry out the visit of the family or the individual. Should it be from the health side? Should it be from the social side? How do we better benefit this individual with that measures that we're collecting that informs us a bit better of their needs, right? So then we'll be able to send the right resources to engage them. Planning measure also used to manage complex cases, looking at opportunities to do joint visits, joint care, and support plans. So like I mentioned, so that these data sets then will allow us to understand some of the needs of the users on the ground, having both the social and healthcare data put together, so that we are then able to create care plans that make sense for the people on the ground. For the client that's in their homes. So some of the benefits of this they saw with this aligned shared outcomes was they are better at diagnosing problems. So they, for example, delays in transfer of care, now they are able to see it from a data perspective. Data integration also allow better program evaluations. Then that also then gives them information on how to then plan for future preventive work. It then serves as a performance measure as well, looking at meaningful outcomes rather than outputs. And with this, the data being shared on a monthly and a weekly basis, that really forced multiple agencies to work together because now they have a similar objective. So then that increases the likelihood of effective partnerships between multiple agencies. So I think you realize then in this case, this exercise was actually done on a governmental scale. So some of these things certainly we may not be able to do it alone. We may need to master the entire system to move along with us. Certainly, I think this is something that we are moving towards, but on the very least, I think based on our own data, based on what we already have, there's a lot of things that we can already do as well. Okay, so great. So next we are moving gears a little bit to talk more about predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics, right? So how to use data to tell us what will happen and perhaps how to make it happen. Predictive data analytics looks at using analytics to find out what is likely to happen. So how does that usually work is through research to identify certain factors that relates to that outcome that we want to see. So in this case, for example, risk factors of child abuse and neglects, right? So what are some of the risk factors from research? So individual risk factors could be low birth weight, pregnancy complications, child temperament and behavior, child disability, so on and so forth. This is just some examples over here. And of course, there's also family and parental factors as well. Parents being involved in criminal behaviors, family conflict and violence. So each of these factors can be found in different data sets, right? So some of it could be from the social work data sets. Some of it could be from police data sets, so on and so forth. So then trying to understand where can we find this data? How do we access the data? Can we explore? Can we merge this data? Can it be used? And then processing this data, extracting the data, cleaning it, reducing some of the data, transforming it in order to do something usable. And from there, we create a predictive model, right? So it can be in form of decision trees or some kind of multivariate statistics or patterns. So with that model, then we're able to then perhaps through these factors predict certain outcomes, whether if the risk of this child to be subjected to more abuse, what is there a risk score? Can we come up with a risk score? And with that risk score, then can we do something about it, right? So with that data, then next thing is with the model, then next thing would be to visualize it or to make it accessible. So either to have that in some form of a software such as Python or R or something like that, or a user interface where that data information can be consumed.
Prescriptive analytics, then we're moving gears to talk about how to make things happen and what should be done. So one example of here in Florida, Bowen Sheriff's Office, they have what they call a ChildNet. What they use this to do is to create a machine learning algorithm that determines if a child that enter the child welfare system, how likely is this is this child going to become a repeated case? Will this child come back again? Right. So then crawling data from the different databases in order to come up with this algorithm to predict the likelihood of that outcome. Right. And with that, then they are able to provide tailored recommendations to each child or each family, being able to match the family or the child to available resources or services, so to prevent this child from coming back to the welfare system again. So in this case, is prescriptive in the sense that it's able, with this model, is able to tell us that, hey, this case for this child, what kind of resources this family might need, and able to do that recommendation to their family, right? So through that a little exercise, you realize that actually 28% of the cases perhaps could be improved through this predictive model by recommending them the right resources to go to. That this model also improved the capability of verifying and substantiating reports of abuse by having a risk profile. They also mentioned identifies about 30% of these referrals as low risk cases that may require little intervention. Of course, this is not saying that they do not go and help their family as well, but perhaps in terms of resource planning, then this comes into play. And with this, they also recognize that actually a significant portion of cases that have been going to the courts may not warrant such a referral. So so looking at the severity of the cases, right, in being able to come up with a risk profile, then actually a large number of these cases do not need to go to the court and then go through that lengthy process as well. So maybe allow us to better manage cases as well. So how do we then use data to drive person-centered care? I think today we have multiple data sets everywhere. If you're coming from a large organization, social organization, you may have senior activity centers, you have rehab programs, you have befriending programs, you have home help, you have a slew of different services, right? Currently, is that data integrated? I think most of us have these data perhaps sitting in silos. Right, so in terms of how data is being housed and how data is being kept. So it's really quite siloed and decentralized. And with this, then the benefits of data stays within each of these domains. So if we really want to have a person-centered care, if we want to use data to drive person-centered care, then are we able to consolidate some of these data throughout the services that we have, right? Consolidation of this data then enable us to see our clients as a person, because he or she goes through multiple of our services, not just one of our services, right? So to have a person-centered point of view, then we really need to understand and have a single record per client to understand what is our clients, what kind of services are they engaging us on, and what's the experience like. With that consolidation that allows us to generate person-centric insights. With that insights, then that goes back into informing our different services. How might we deliver services more coordinated, in a more coordinated fashion? Perhaps integrating some of our services in order to deliver more person-centered care, or more to achieve more person-centered outcomes, right? So in order to achieve that, then we really need to look at how we house our data right now. Most of our data sits in silos. Can we reduce the friction in terms of retrieval of data? right? So do you need to fill out lots of forms? Do you need to get lots of approvals just to get access to data? So those forms and approvals are there for a reason. They're there because maybe some of these data are sensitive, and therefore we want to be careful of who access this data. But can we rather look from another point of view to encourage transparency and accountability here? So rather than having data custodians as being guardians of data, right? Okay, no, you can't get access to data. To become educators instead, to educate people that, hey, this is what the data set is about, and this data set is something that's sensitive, and what you're going to use it for. Can we have that mindset shift? And to hold people accountable. If you're going to use this data, then you're accountable for using it. So data security and all that needs to come into play. So if we are able to remove friction to have more transparency, more accountability, hopefully then we can encourage data sharing. And with data sharing of insights, then that benefits everyone as well. Actually, most of the time for analysts, they don't need data that is identifiable. They just need data that's anonymized, and they are able to identify patterns out of that as well. So that's also another way of looking at how we can then perhaps share data more freely. And then looking at how we consolidate data as well. Are we able to have data consolidation systems or information architectures in place? This is something that we are certainly looking at from for example, in MSF, right? They're trying to pull together data, also informing the public that, hey, allow us to share data with different agencies so that we are able to help you find the care that you need, right? So hopefully in time we'll be able to have less data silos within organizations and also between organizations and the government. So we now often say that more data is good, right? So a data set looks like that. If you're able to increase the data, then the amount of insights that increases exponentially. That while that is true, I also want to point out a caution over here. It's always not about having more data, but having good quality data is just as important. If not, then you just have a hairball of data to sort through that doesn't bring you any benefits. So if we really want to create predictive models or even just use data for diagnostic purposes, we need to understand if our data can be trusted, right? So with that, we need to understand how data was manufactured, how data was created, recorded, and stored. Yeah. So data are captures a certain snapshot in time. So maybe one thing to ask whether this data can be trusted is, when was this data captured? Respect that there are seasonalities in data sets, right? So maybe certain months you might have higher cases, certain months you might have lower cases. So if this data is captured happen to be captured in a month where there are high cases, then how will that show? Are we able to then maybe take a larger data set that negates this seasonality effect? Or completeness of data, right? For example, this picture up here, are we able to tell if there's a UFO in the middle of the field? We can't, because we do not have a complete data set, right? So when we look at our data sets, we also want to make sure that they are well and complete. All the necessary factors are there. It's representative of the population. Okay, then this is maybe a data set that I can trust. And then also understand how data is being created, right? So if you're using, say, drop down a list box in your surveys, for example, you're artificially binning people into different categories. That is useful from a data analytics point of view, because then they are now easy to be sorted into different groups. But is this the best way to do things? Maybe there are fields that we did not consider. So for example, if it's race, you only have Chinese, Malay, Indian, others, then how useful is others? Or If you have got gender, then there are multiple different genders that are out there other than just male or female, right? So do we have the correct fields over there to be representative of the population? That's something that we also need to understand, right? How are we generating data? Can the data be trusted and be used? So with data, if you put data into context, data is just what we have recorded from our systems, from our surveys. If you are able to put them in context of what we do, they become information. And if you are able to use this information in an actionable way, then perhaps it becomes knowledge, and we apply the knowledge, and they become wisdom. So what we're trying to say here, all right, ultimately wisdom then steers our service outcomes, right? So if we apply our knowledge, if we apply data, we are able to influence our service outcomes. But most importantly, we need to have data quality, information quality, and decision quality in order to then have meaningful outcomes. So then the importance of understanding how data is generated, how data is collected, how data is stored, then comes into play. If not, then whatever analytics approaches that you have on top, maybe you don't have data quality, it will be meaningless because your information, your knowledge there will not be something that's accurate. So one example over here would be data interoperability, right? So if you have got multiple, for example, in healthcare, heart attack has got multiple different terms, right? Heart attack is also myocardial infarction. It can also be called coronary infarction. And Singaporeans would then say, oh, it's MI, right? So there are multiple different synonyms to a single condition. If you're working in the space of, say, mental health, in terms of depression, the way that we write it down in our case notes can also be different, right? It can be major depression, major depressive disorder, clinical depression. Depends on who writes it. I think we might write a different term over here. But from a data perspective, then this is chaos. Because how do I then put a data set together that is meaningful when there are so many different terms that are actually meaning the same thing? So with that, then we need to be able to have a common data lexicon in order for us to understand one another, in order for us to pull together a data set that actually makes sense, right? So with that, then we need to follow some form of standards in order to remove that cultural division, perhaps, that we have. In order to make a data set meaningful. So in healthcare, then we use SNOMED to look at that. For social care, what might that be, and how do we establish that standard? Is something that maybe organizations and us as industry might want to look at. Another case study here in terms of recidivism predictive models, right? So recidivism, what is that? It's the tendency of a convicted criminal to reoffend. Recidivism model, a predictive model, then looks at calculating the risk of a criminal reoffending, right? So how does this work then? How does it help the judges then? Is that it tells the judges, what's the danger that this person imposed to the community, and if I'm going to shorten the sentence and let this person go free, is that going to be detrimental, right? If this person has got high risk of reoffending, then maybe I want to keep this person incarcerated for a longer time. So the idea here is to use a mathematical model to reduce human bias of judges, right? To reduce their prejudice in sentencing. So then such a system was used in 24 states in the US. Outcomes that they have saw by applying this model was that sentencing became more consistent. It also seemed that the sentencing were less swayed by the mood of the judges. And from a dollar perspective, it helped people to save money, helped the system to save money because sentences becomes shorter. But one question to everyone now, maybe you can type in the chat group. Do you think such a model is a good or bad thing? Does it really work? Do you want to have this in Singapore? Any thoughts? Need more data first, says Adam. Do you want a mathematical model to calculate reoffending, chances for reoffending? Okay, so let's expand more data, right? So Adams wants more data. Let's look at more data. So this is a model that was used in the US. It's called Level of Service Inventory Revised, LSIR. It classifies inmates as high, medium, low risk based on points accumulated by offenders. How are these points calculated is based on questionnaire that's given to these inmates. Right, so then it is how is it used? And then it's used to in some states to work on the high risk inmates, to send them to anti-recidivism programs in prisons so that they will have likely less chances to reoffend. And in some states, the judges use this as a score to guide them in sentencing. Data used for this model comes from a lengthy survey that convicts fill out. So the questions here include things like how many prior convictions have you had? What part did others play in the offense? What part did drugs and alcohol play? But in this case, in that questionnaire, it also includes questions such as when was the first time you were involved with the police? And do any of your family members have been convicted of a crime? Immediately, if you look at this question over here, if you imagine that you're an inmate from a privileged background, what's the likelihood of you being involved with the police at a younger age? Probably unlikely, right? So if you stay in a more affluent side of the city, you're probably going to be less involved with the police. Or in the case of the US, if you're white, then perhaps you're less involved with the police. If you're of color, then the more likely that the police might stop you. Or if you're living in a poorer side of the town, then the chances are of being stopped by a police just because they are doing their rounds and you just so happen that you just came off the bar and you're looking a bit tipsy, they stop you, right? So with this, then we can see that in terms of backgrounds, where they come from, privileged or unprivileged, then there might be a difference. And do your family members have convicted of a crime? Does that really have got anything to do with a person reoffending? Not really, right? But if we include these questions into how a predictive model works, then we might actually be hindering people from escaping from that system, right? So if a model is built on such questions, then it's quite dangerous. Yeah, so just want to give a word of caution here, right? So factors used in risk models are perhaps only accessible to some, and few understand how the risk scores are calculated. Factors obscured by a predictive model, people tend to trust mathematical models because they perceive mathematical models as impartial. It is illegal to include race or social and economic status as a factor, but that doesn't stop the model to perpetuate discrimination in this case. So this results then in a vicious cycle by keeping the minority or the less privileged in a perpetual loop. And people who notice these issues on the model may think that these people are unfortunate cases of but necessary collateral to such an effective mathematical model. What I'm trying to say here is predictive models are models that try to model after a reality, right? But how well are we able to model reality using mathematical models? There are still limitations over here, and there'll be people who fall out of the loop over here and may then get victimized by these models. So what I'm trying to say, why I want to talk about this here, is that I think the importance for us to understand data, the importance for us to understand how predictive and prescriptive models are being created, so that in future, when data becomes more and more rampant and this kind of models become more and more prevalent, then we will be able to identify and understand and know whether if these models are truly useful or in fact hindering us in a way that we the outcomes that we want to see. Right, so if you're interested in more of these kind of issues that we see in predictive models, then you might want to pick up this book called Weapon of Math Destruction, written by Cathy O'Neill, where algorithms claim to quantify important traits, in the end prove to be harmful to us, and reinforcing inequality and keeping the poor poor and the rich rich. So that's something to look at. Not saying that predictive models are not a good thing, but analytics is a tool that can be used for both good and also not so good. So it's really down to how we actually use the data, how do we then make sense out of it. So aligning back to digital transformation over here, mindful of time, we're kind of running out of time. So it's not about having more data on hand. We can choose to leverage on what data we have and do better with what we have. Data can be used to improve value that we bring to our clients, such as improving efficiency or experience, or design better programs, or to become more cost efficient. But yeah, so I think we just need to look at how better we can ingrain the use of data in our day-to-day work. It's not hard to embark on digital driven organizations journey. So I think all of us have started in one way or another. But however, I guess it's about the maturity and how we use data that it really matters. So how can we then do that? And last but not least, we need to understand data analytics, and not so that we can leverage on them, but also keep our society safe from the examples that we just gave, right? Weapons of math destruction. Right, so I think that brings us to the end of a little sharing over here in terms of data analytics, use of data analytics in social services. So maybe if you have enjoyed it, do leave us a survey by taking a screen, scanning out the QR code over here, or writing to us as well. I think I can paste the link in the chat as well. Yes, thanks, Yao-Ming. Yeah, so while you're filling out the survey, also just to talk about the sharing of that video, I think some of you may need to hop off or just joined us halfway through if you would like to see the full video. That will eventually be published on our website, our little support community that pulls together people who are interested in driving health and social transformation. Our little group here is called Health Impact Collab. So if you'd like to find out more, you can go to the website that's over here, or join us on LinkedIn groups, and then that will inform us on future events that we might be having in case you're interested, right? So this at this website is also where you can find the video as well. If not, then I thank you for your time, for joining us for this little talk on power of data, using data in social services. Hope you find it insightful. If there's anything you'd like to know more, feel free to drop us a note. Perhaps join the LinkedIn group and post your questions there. You can also go there and answer some of your queries. Thanks so much. Thank you.